And this chapter's on Lashon Tov.
Yep. Welcome to chapter 9, Lashon Tov. Lashon Tov means Lashon is speaking, Tov is good things. And I want to share a personal story right off the get, and I'm going to ask you yours later, so be prepared, right? I was in theater in high school, and I was trying to sell tickets for the show, and I asked my one of my teachers, who was a psychology 101 class in high school, my senior year of high school, and I asked him if he wanted to buy tickets, and he said, I really love theater, and I can't really appreciate a high school production. So I'll pass.
That's not Lashon Tov. That's Lashon Hara.
So this guy was honest to a T. He never, he was really straightforward, and he called him straight. It was really so it was not meant as a discounting in any way, shape, or form, but it was just a statement, a fact. And but somehow or another, he ended up coming to the show. Why he didn't buy tickets for me, I don't know, but he did. He came to the show. After the show was over, he came back to the cast room, and I saw him walk in the door, and I saw him look over the cast. It's all, chatting and about the show and talking, whatever. And I see him look over the cast, lock eyes on me, and walk straight to me. And he said, "Grossman, you were good. You were damn good."
Oh, that's nice.
And then he turned around and he walked out. I went backstage and broke down and cried. This is not a guy who hands out compliments. And
that's exactly what this chapter was about.
And you know what? It was a powerful feeling coming from him. And 40 years later, I'm still talking, more than 40 years later, I'm still talking about how he made me feel with those short words, right? So that's the topic. That's the topic tonight. And I think, again, the Rebbe, par excellence, the Rebbe exhibits this concept in really, really powerful ways. And we're going to look at the negative side first, right? Like you mentioned, Lashon Hara. And Lashon Hara, that's interesting because in the laws of speech, Lashon Hara is different from Motzi Shemra. Lashon Hara, Motzi Shemra is really all about, Motzi Shemra is all about, what's the legal term? I'm saying gossip, so it's just, it's spreading a bad name, right? Lashon Hara specifically is a term used when what you say is true, 100% true, but it's bringing up a negative thought, another negative feeling, right? So it's not even like it's not slander, Slander is mostly shemra. It's a lie. It's not even true. Lashon Hara it's true, and yet it's not pleasant about somebody, and it brings up a negative side of them, and it has an impact. It really has an impact. And there's a story that the Rebbe writes in Hayom Yom, which is the thoughts for each day that Rebbe writes about, and from the negative we'll understand the positive. But the Rebbe writes here a story from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidim. Once two men had a quarrel while in the Baal Shem Tov synagogue, and one man shouted that he would tear the other fellow to pieces like a fish. The Baal Shem Tov gathered his pupils and told them to hold hands, or put hands on the shoulders of the person next to you, and close the circle. And then when he put his hands on the shoulders of the two students next to him, completing the circle, he elevated them to a place where they could actually see the spiritual manifestation of what the guy just saw. They literally saw him ripping the guy apart like a fish. And they screamed in terror and fear, whatever. And what the Baal Shem Tov was sharing, what the Rebbe shares, the idea that Rebbe wants to share, is our words have an effect. They may not be, like a physical manifestation of something, but just like we have thought, speech, and actions, negative speech has an impact in the spiritual world, just like negative actions have a physical impact down here in the physical world. So the mere saying of something negative has an effect. And in the laws of Lashon Hara, we talk about Lashon Hara affects three people. It affects the person who says it because they're doing a sin, right? Because we're not allowed to listen to Lashon Hara, the person who hears it is also guilty of a sin. So obviously those two are in trouble. But the third guy they're talking about, Chassidus wants to say, he didn't even hear it. He didn't say it. He didn't hear it. He doesn't even know about it. It happened without his presence. How is he affected? And the answer is that the mere mention of a negative aspect of someone's personality, the mentioning of that empowers it. Even when he's not there, even when he doesn't hear it. Because we're all in this spiritual realm, you know. I have a friend who's I think both of you have met him in one way or another, a friend of mine who's a professor of theoretical quantum physics at the university. And he told me a little bit about the concept of quantum entanglement.
I know who you're talking about.
And so the idea is that in the physical, in the quantum world, when things get attached to each other, even if they, are totally separate and nowhere near each other, but there's an entanglement that connects them, and it has an impact. And so, in the same way, we see from the physics, from physics, you can see the same thing here. In the spiritual realm, we're talking about that whether it's speech or action, a negative thought or action will have an impact on another person. And so it's kind of a.
He doesn't hear it.
Pardon?
Around. It's gossip is what we're talking about.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
We're talking about gossip, vicious gossip. Yeah.
Well, and gossip usually is not something which is true. Lashon Hara is actually, it's true what was being said. There's an example from Hayomim, from the Rebbe, where one of the Rebbe's sons, not this Rebbe, but of a previous generation, when he was accused of something, he said, "I didn't do it. So and so the tailor did it." And his father said, "Stay away from Lashon Hara." He was only trying to vindicate himself, and he was telling the truth, but he got reprimanded. It's unnecessary. So very fine quality of that we have to be, thinking of. But I think in so many other ways, we can, from the negative, we can learn the opposite side, the positive. If this is true in the negative world, imagine the power of positive speech, of Lashon Tov, saying
And
good
the book
things.
does this a lot. It starts out with the negative and goes into why the positive is so much better.
Yeah, exactly. And we can choose to make that choice to bring that out. So obviously Lashon Tov, if we talk about someone in a good way, and we whether in their presence or not in their presence, but the mere use of that speech in a good way can activate those bring those things to the surface, right? So we can actually build someone up. And so the idea of taking every opportunity we have to encourage someone, say something positive about them. And again, the nice part about this book is we talk about a topic, but then he gives stories, right? And I love stories, but not only because I love stories. Listen, if the good Lord decided to share his wisdom with stories, and the first 2 books of the Torah are just stories, right? Then obviously that's got to be a good teaching tool. So stories is a very powerful way of teaching a lesson, because you remember it. You can picture it and you can remember it, you can think it through, right? So the Rebbe would look for opportunities, actively looking for opportunities to compliment people. And that is one of the fun stories here was Raphael Noril. He was born in Iraq. He was trained as a classical artist. And when he moved to London, and he had a Bavatcher neighbors who invited him over, he came and he saw the Rebbe's picture, and he was struck. He was connected just in the Rebbe's picture, and he And in that moment, he decided he wanted to learn. He wanted to paint the Rebbe's picture. But to paint someone, you really have to get to know them. So, so he started learning some Hasidus, some of the Rebbe's discourses and stories about the Rebbe, and getting to know the Rebbe. And in fact, he started to daven, started to put on tefillin, started to keep Shabbos. Just more and more he was attaching himself to the Rebbe. These became, just notable things he would bring out. And eventually he was able to really put together a portrait of the Rebbe. And eventually he was able,
I remember reading that, yes.
he was eventually able to go to New York. He brought this picture with the painting with him, and he brought it to the Rebbe. He showed the picture to the Rebbe. And what was the Rebbe's comment? I love this. What was the Rebbe's comment? Very good. Very good. Very good. Better than the original.
Better than the original. Yeah, that was a good line.
That's sweet, but like, what a compliment to an artist, right?
Yeah, made me look better than I am. That's nice.
Yeah, and so I think that's again, the Rebbe is always finding ways to say something good and complimentary, and there's more and more stories in here. The other one I found about, which we started about initially when we talk about, you share a story, you bring up a person's qualities. So, bringing good qualities out in a person, and maybe even revealing qualities they didn't have, that didn't know that they had, hidden qualities. And it brings a beautiful story about Susan Schuster. She grew up in a very, very, very secular environment in New York, and she went through school. She became a nurse. She married a successful physician, and then they moved to Florida, and they started having children. And one of her kids got involved with a Lubavitch family, went to the Hebrew school, and of course, one thing led to another. They started becoming Sabbath observant and religious. Eventually, they had an opportunity to visit the Rebbe in New York. And what was the Rebbe's comment to her? Your husband is a plastic surgeon. He makes people beautiful on the outside. It should be your mission to make people beautiful on the inside, to reveal the beauty, the internal beauty. And so, yeah, she took that to heart, and she started inviting people for Shabbos, and she made Shabbos very special with all kinds of delicacies and decorations and things, so that it would help bring out the good in people when they would come for Shabbos and visit. And again, so here was an innate quality that she had, that she didn't necessarily see herself or use herself, but that Eb was able to bring that out. And the other part that's unique is that Eb's ability to treat each person as a one of a kind, as the unique gift of God. You hear sometimes about someone who thinks he's God's gift to the universe, right? But Rebbe flipped that around, right? Every individual he would meet is God's gift to the universe, and he would bring that part out within the individual. And there's this beautiful, and that takes a phenomenal memory. That takes you have to really be, remember things, and there's just so many stories about the Rebbe remembering someone. I saw a video clip the other day. It was a chaplain. Military chaplain who came for the Rebbe by dollars. And when he came by and he was introduced, the Rebbe said, "Yes, you wrote to me before." Now, the guy didn't remember writing to the Rebbe. But the Rebbe said, "No, you wrote to me years before." And the guy received a blessing. He received his dollar. He went away. And later, he was reflecting that more than 10 years earlier, he and his wife had not been blessed with children. And a Lubavitcher friend of his had told him, "You should write to the Rebbe." And he's not a Lubavitcher chassid. He didn't think to write to the Rebbe, but his friend encouraged him. And so he finally wrote, and he wrote into the Rebbe. He wrote for a bracha for children. And then he forgot about it. within the year, he was blessed with the first of a number of children that they were blessed with. But within the year, he was blessed with children. And
Is that
somehow
in this chapter?
it's not in this chapter. No, it was a video clip.
I don't remember this story.
Yeah, it was a video clip I watched of this guy, going to Dollars for the Rebbe and getting the backstory on it. The guy had not remembered he wrote to the Rebbe. He had the blessing, he had the children, and he didn't remember. And now, after this story of going to the Rebbe saying, yes, you wrote to me. Years ago, you wrote to me, right? And the guy didn't remember it. And then he thought about it, and then he went, oh my goodness. I wrote to the Rebbe for a bracha for children. We were blessed with children, and I never connected the two. Right? But the Rebbe remembered. So this is a story about Judge Jerome Hornblass, New York State Supreme Court. And
that was in here. Yeah.
Yeah, and he came to see the Rebbe. And as he was coming up this is coming up for dollars on Sunday, and we talked about the dollar line. And as he's coming up, the Rebbe sees he's coming up, and he says, Tekiah Shofar, like the Tekiah Shofar guy. Judge Hornblass didn't connect those. It didn't make sense to him. And later, downstairs in 770, he met Reb Zev Katz, who was one of the Gaboyim of the guys at 770 at the synagogue at 770. And Rabbi Katz said to him, he said, maybe you remember me. My mother was a patient at Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital this past Rosh Hashanah, and you came in the room to blow shofar. You came to her room to blow shofar. And then suddenly Judge Hornblass remembers the blowing of the shofar. And he said, he asked Rabbi Katz, did you mention this to the Rebbe? And said, yeah, sure, I told the Rebbe. Why didn't you tell him? Right after Rosh Hashanah, I reported back to the Rebbe that you had come to blow shofar. Out of all the people he met that day, hundreds of people online, right? And all the stories he's heard at the time, the Rebbe remembered Judge Hornblass and his act of loving kindness to blow shofar. And he did not let that go unacknowledged. He made a point of referring back to him, the shofar blowing guy, the Tekiah Shofar guy, right?
And there's no irony with the name?
Hornblass? I hadn't even connected that, but yeah. No, that's right. Beautiful thing there. There was
to figure out, that it was a nice compliment in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An acknowledgement of his act of kindness, blowing shofar for a gal in the hospital, and that goes a long way. But I think it's also the recognition of the individual, right?
That you actually took the time to remember something about them.
Yeah. And I think it takes obviously the Rebbe is in a completely different category, but I think for all of us, sometimes you meet someone and you don't expect that they'll remember you. And then, a year or two down the line, they actually remember you, maybe even remember your name. And it touches you, touches your heart that someone remembers you, right? One of the things I think when they talk about in business and building bridges and making connections, remember a person's name and use it. Because if you remember that and use it to them, it'll touch their heart. It acknowledges who they are and that you know them and you remember them, and that's a special piece as well. And so the Rebbe would do that regularly with these kind of things. There was another story here about the wife of a distinguished New York rabbi came to the Rebbe one Sunday for dollars to give to charity and for blessings. The Rebbe greeted her warmly and he said, "It's so nice to see you. You haven't been here for a while, but that's the way it is with really precious things. You only see them from time to time." What a beautiful statement, right?
Instead of saying you haven't come around too much, yes.
Beautiful, beautiful, touching way to say that. So with every interaction, the Rebbe would constantly seek out a way to compliment, to inspire, to acknowledge each person's talents, their strengths, their potentials, something, saying Lashon Tov, something positive to say to help manifest and strengthen the inherent points of goodness that we have. And so now I want to call on you guys to, if you share a story, if you can, of a time when you remember someone touching you because of they remembered something or pointed out one of your qualities or something like that.
Zev, you remember anything? Because I'm drawing a blank.
No, I think I've told you the story about my 8th grade art teacher who told me I'd never amount to anything. I told you about that one. And my high school guidance counselor told me I'd never get into college. Those were inspirations. But you know, I probably
Not this kind of inspiration.
no, that's negative stuff. You know, I don't know that it had anything much heaped upon me, but you know, as I was training surgical residents, as they were coming up, you know, it's 7 years after medical school to train a surgeon in my specialty, and so you kind of have to build them up over time. And if all you ever do is knock them down and give negative comments, they're never going to learn from you, and they're never going to want to be around you if you berate them, because that's the experience I had when I was in training. And I always vowed that I would never do that if I ever got into that position. So when it came my turn, I took a totally different approach. I looked at my trainees as my children, you know, and you give them positive reinforcement. Now you do have to provide constructive criticism in order for them to grow. After all, you're trying to make them competent surgeons. You don't want them to, you know, to make mistakes. So you do have to provide constructive criticism and good counsel and good guidance. But so there has to be some positive reinforcement to offset, you know, any critique that you may provide. So it is kind of a balancing act. And one of the residents I remember distinctly came back about 2 years later to a graduation dinner. You know, all the graduates would come back to this dinner, and he came up to me and said, "I finally realized what you were trying to do, and you made me a better surgeon because of it." So he thanked me.
Beautiful
You
example.
know, I used a similar theory last let's call it in the military and in the police, being, you know, paramilitary, we give out awards. And I never hesitated to put people in for them. As a matter of fact, the more the merrier. I wanted to reward good work, and it breeds more. It breeds better work. You know, people appreciate the award.
Yeah.
Yeah, recognition, sure.
A Bronze Star, a Commendation Medal. We have similar awards on the police department, and it works.
Yeah.
A little work on my part to do it, but it's like that. It's make sure people know the positive things about somebody else.
And it encourages others to live up to those standards as well. Then, as long as it's honest, you know, if the award is earned, then people they appreciate it. They want to be a part of that, and it sets the high standards for everyone else to follow those leads.
But if everybody gets a recognition trophy, then
No, not everybody.
there's no, you know.
I'm just saying that there are times to reward the good work.
Sure. No question.
And as long as it's honest, I think that's the other part, is that I once had I won't get too many details here, but I once had an employer who found all the things to criticize. And at one point I turned back to this employer and I said, "Have you ever heard of the sandwich rule? There's a bun on the top and there's a bun on the bottom and there's a meat in the middle. I want you, if you're going to correct me, I want you to start with a specific compliment that you say that I'm doing something right. Then you can tell me what you really want to say. And then you can end it with another compliment that's true. But if you can't sandwich the rough stuff, then I can't hear it." And she just never spoke to me again. she didn't give positive, but she couldn't give negative. So, okay, so she just stopped giving any feedback. But yeah, the positive stuff is what feeds us and encourages us and makes us want to do more.
Right. Sometimes that's a good way to make a correction for somebody, is to point out a couple good things and tell them that this is something that you need to correct.
Right. And if there's twice as much of the positive stuff, and not fluff, not, oh, you're doing a great job, here's where you can improve. Here's where you're doing a great job. Here's an area of improvement, and here's another area where you're doing a great job. But if you sandwich specific positive insight of what you're doing, and you can acknowledge it because you can feel that, that that's true, right? Then maybe the other thing's true as well. But if it's just giving fluff, then it's just BS. You know that. It's,
Now, nowadays, I don't have troops anymore or police officers. I have grandchildren. And that's a similar ball game. Got to remember to be kind and correction.
You make them fall in.
Fall in, kids.
And trust me, they don't follow orders too well.
So how much more so you have to catch them when they're doing good, right? Catch them when they're doing good and praise those moments so that maybe they'll have some more of those. They want to get more of those.
Like I said, I've got two that live underneath us here. So
very good. Good challenge. A good challenge. Well, thank you for joining us for this class, and we'll do it again.